So today I thought, in lieu of our food review, that I would do a book review of sorts. But being that it's a book that I kind of doubt many people are into or have read, it's not really by any big author, it's just kind of a collection of stuff about UFOs. I wanted to talk about it because this was a book that I found extremely important as a child. It was extraordinarily frightening to me, and it gave me horrible nightmares, so much so that I had to get rid of my copy, and I only recently picked up a copy again. So I wanted to talk a bit about it, and I'll just make this little note. I thought it was interesting that it kind of mirrored Twin Peaks and mirrored the Red Room, the patterning. But this book, which I was reading when I was very young, gets into Carl Jung and Wilhelm Reich and David Bowie, all of which were very big influences a bit later on, a few years after this. So I always found that this book had a lot of important kind of unconscious effect on me, that a lot of what I read here would go on to affect me greatly. So you see things like this, like the ancient pictures that they believed were of aliens, that a lot of the theories had centered around this fact that strange depictions exist, and their theory was essentially that these strange things are alien in nature, or UFOs. And this fascinated me greatly, because before aliens I was into Greek, Roman, and various myths. So this was like an awesome marriage of those two things. Even the relation to strange creatures and demons. All of these things were greatly fascinating to me, and my earlier interest in UFOs and monsters and such. So this was like, candy to me. This was greatly entertaining and amusing. I'm trying to find you an image that really scared me. This was terrifying to me. All of these different species of aliens. I found it very, very scary. So the real point of that book, and why I wanted to talk about it, is that it gets me into how I started to think the way that I think. And I think how everybody starts to think the way that they think, which is through childhood entertainment and childhood media. And that book gave me a lot to think about and to see, a lot of images that, I don't think children are ever prepared to take in much of what we visually perceive. So much of the world is very unbelievable to a child who really has been sheltered to an extent. Every baby, grows up at home for the most part with just their family. And when they get these new radical inputs of information, just a book can do it. And nowadays there's so much more. But back to the main point of aliens, monsters, and these sorts of things, cryptids. So I found that aliens and cryptids were super, super interesting to me. I was horrified of the idea that I might have an encounter with one. Already I had a kind of projected other. Aliens are the mother of all others, in the words of Mark Frost. I found that book to be just so utterly fascinating, so disturbing. I think in part due to the relation of this ultimate other, in a dangerous, dark way, to a comforting other in the form of gods and monsters, like elves and fairies. These creatures and beings that I felt attuned to and comfortable with through my upbringing with mythology were now kind of being perverted into these horrific, out there beasts, these cold, immortal otherness. Just aliens don't have the physicality of a god, the strength, the humanity, the beauty, the art. Aliens are just so ultimately distant from us. So I think what I'm really getting at is that book is what gave me my first real revelation as to the relationship between aliens and cold others and myths, warm others, something old and something new. So that became a really big fascination, which culminated in the release of like the History Channel's show Ancient Aliens. And Ancient Aliens was like huge to me. This idea like, oh my God, everything old is actually aliens. That fascination with Ancient Aliens culminated in the release of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which also had that thesis that old stuff is actually aliens. Now, all of that was super fascinating. I was super into archaeology, and that is something that I would go on to find out that Jung was really interested in as well, and that fascinated me a lot. I think that ultimately what Jung, you know what, I'm going to save that for later. Right now, I'm going to focus on what archaeology became, which is to say that this interest in like an archaeology with theory attached to it. Because the whole idea of normal science is you're not going to have a theory attached to the work. So an archaeologist is not going to be like a Kantian or a Deleuzian archaeologist unless they're a crazy one. So my whole thing was like, I want to discover alien stuff. That was very different. What it led to, though, was a realization about there being cross-continental and cross-cultural symbols which were shared. What was thought to be aliens bringing the same stuff down to everybody. I would later go on, through the brilliant work of Sting and the Police and their album Synchronicity, I would find out about Carl Jung and realize that, oh, he has the same thesis, but his makes sense and is actually real. Ancient aliens are themselves expressions of the same old things. Aliens are not new. They are very, very old hat. Gods became aliens, not aliens were perceived as gods. There has only ever been one essential archetypal nature to these sorts of shared symbols, experiences, and aspects of humanity. So that very important inversion of ancient alien theory is what produced, I think, one of the most interesting concepts, because we should not ignore archetypes. We should not ignore there being cross-cultural, cross-continental, uncanny similarities. We do need to look at them. I just think it's important to not attribute it to something inhuman. Like, there's a really good meme of all the, like, of the Easter Island heads, the pyramids, and it's like, just because white people couldn't do it doesn't mean it's aliens. We should not attribute to inhumanity what could be a superhumanity. So that is my thought about that. So one other point I wanted to get at, and this is almost another book review in itself, but it's about John Keel's Mothman Prophecies, and just how impressive I find that book, and how impressive his theory on cryptid phenomena is, which is essentially what he sees as parallel dimensions and energetic vibrations being able to cross through in what he would term zones and zones of fear. Now, I see this as almost directly Reichian, and that these zones of fear, which Keel is describing, correlate to DOR zones, deadly orgone zones, which Wilhelm Reich is describing. And utilizing the synthesis of Reich and Jung, which I have primarily pushed in past videos, the idea that locational libido is capable of manifesting in a collective form is not that far-fetched. The idea that there are areas with a vibe or energy and which people in that community share a kind of psychic makeup and would, with the right stimulus, experience similar emotions and similar feelings, we get the perfect case for phenomena like the Mothman, like Men in Black. I think it's very important that we look at the strangest things, at this kind of Fortean phenomena. Not just Freudian, but Fortean. We need both. One cannot disregard the occult and the psychic. I have been thinking quite a bit about how psychoanalysis itself is a deeply occult system. The focus on transference alone shows that, to an extent, telepathy is real and particularly important in the therapeutic setting. Something that every therapist experiences at one point or another, and I'd imagine most people experience at one point or another. But really what I'm getting at is that in my earliest childhood media, I was given the palette which would become my life. A great deal of my interests and ideas could have been inferred from my entertainment as a child. And I wonder where you all can see, the important, DNA that would go on to structure you. What entertainment, what TV shows, what books, even what ideas, stories from your parents. All of it is absolutely vital. And it's important that when one gets into these very high and mighty philosophies and psychologies, that we don't lose sight of the all-important childhood media. It's very important, and it's very important that it's of good quality. That is why I love children's books, good quality children's books. My favorite story of all time is Oscar Wilde's Happy Prince. That was my favorite story when I was little, and it's my favorite story now. So don't be ashamed of your childhood and what media influenced you, because those were vectors of memes. They are what allowed you to duplicate ideas, to share ideas with people. We cannot deny our mimetic makeup any more than we can deny our genetic makeup. And as always, remember, memes matter.